Welcome back to Fireside Frith, the official podcast of the Asatru Community. We share stories, wisdom, and connection with heathens around the world. I'm your host, Susanna Wandering Star, and you're listening to part 2 of Meet the Board with David Nix. Today, we'll talk about David's goals and behind the scenes of his hopes for the Asatru community. If you haven't listened to part 1, which is episode 13, I would highly encourage you to do so. If you want more of David's background or are interested in learning more about the role of a DRGL in the United States military, check out episode 3. And by no further delay, here is episode 14.
All right, so where were we?
This next group of questions is about personal and community goals. So what are some personal goals you're working on right now, spiritual, professional, or otherwise?
So as we've talked about before, I'm pursuing my master's and then I'm going to roll into the doctorate. But both personal and professional, one of the things that I've been looking at is in order to have chaplains in the military, they have to have a degree and a whole bunch of other things. And while I enjoy our GoThea program as it exists, I want to get into the academic community, and it's considered a bachelor's of the arts in theology. That is how chaplains are being commissioned. There's nothing that says that theology has to be Christian based. And so I've got a couple fillers out through my TAC email to get the course load for a bachelor's of arts in theology for Christian chaplains to be able to help write, script, and develop a bachelor of the arts in pagan theology. And I want to actually make a doctorate program that covers pagan theology that actually mirrors what the Christians do, so that we can professionalize ourselves and exist within institutions to be able to say, okay, this is what we do and here's why. Because I know we talked about it in episode 3, it was like, when I go to marriage retreats, hey, do you have any of these references in a non-theological basis? Because like 12-step program is like the first step is to accept that there's a higher power. Like I did, but it's not God. Like, let's have this conversation. So personally and professionally, what I'm looking at doing is finding colleges that we could partner with to develop these, which I know will actually be more helpful when I am already working with a college as a professor. So my bachelor's and my master's are in strategic leadership. The doctorate will be in strategic leadership. So I'm taking all of the leadership lessons and then trying to distill them down. Courtney and I talked about it for a while. It's like, to me, GoThea in Asatru is not a doctorate of theology. No, they're a doctorate of leader, because it's community focused, and whoever is running the community is a spiritual leader, but they're a leader first. Mm-hmm. We're not going to beg the gods to do these things for us. We're going to do these things to honor the gods. So pulling a lot of that, trying to figure out how we can do it. And I know we talked about it at the end of the last board meeting. I am working on a book that is practical Asatru focused. I should have the primer out February of next year, because I'm going to spend the deployment working on it. And we kind of talked about breaking it up into, to me, there are 9 key aspects of a practitioner that they should focus on. One is, being a Jarl in leadership. One is the farmer, because you need the vineyard practice. But then there's also, law speak. That was the one I didn't mention in the prior conversation. Being able to walk into a religion that is homework focused. I want to make the homework practical. And that'll be the concept of the book is, how do you walk into Asatru and truly become a practitioner? What does that look like? How do you learn to break some of those cycles of, the dogma of church is you go on Sunday and you ask for forgiveness. That's not us. So how do you become an actual productive member of a community so that you can make communities? The intention of actually producing a book that is a practical application to the homework. How do you live the lifestyle? How do you develop that lifestyle that truly reintegrates you into the cycle of life? So that one's in the works. The primer itself will probably be 20 plus pages of examples, and then the book itself will be each chapter broken out into the 9 holds of how do you advance.
Really like that. I think creating a practical guide with your experience, because having your academic background being mostly leadership, and I think you are absolutely right. We are community leaders first and then spiritual leaders. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense in a practical way, because just with my own experience, I have realized that Drew, our other director of religious affairs, he told me recently, he's like, oh no, you're the leader of our local group. I was like, what? I am?
Yeah.
I thought you were. And he was like, no, it's you. Nope. He's like, I'm the secondary.
And a lot of that's what being thrown into that leadership position, and then understanding, like learning to understand, how do you teach someone something if you've never done it. We have, and you can bleep this out or crow it out. Like, we call it the Big Book of Fuck. It's 3 different books combined in one, that is very much like practical, but it gets into like sewing and how rituals are conducted, and it's great, but it lacks
community building
communal
aspect.
Yes, it's very much a personal practice building, and the approach for the book that I'm working on is, the first year is individual. You are building towards being self-sufficient yourself, and then learning how to plan for others. So, like an example, one of the things that I talk about in the writing is a jarl or an earl, or like the actual leader. That is its own portion of leadership. But, reaching back to the Havamal, Odin tells us it's better to have a thatched roof and 2 goats than to be homeless. Well, what does that mean in modern application? And I actually found a YouTube series that they actually go through building a Viking A-frame tent. And again, I'll dive into historical references of like, were these actual things and like longhouses. But I got looking at it, the A-frame tent that they built with a couple of additional items, you could live out of comfortably. This person's based in Colorado, and they put a wood stove in it. And I'm like, wait a second. I have wood stoves that I've been following for a while that you actually add an addition to the smokestack that's an oven. All right, well now, if I have a bed that I've learned to make, and I'm in this tent with this stove with an oven, what am I really missing? But then getting into that conversation of hospitality, if someone I know is struggling, and it's like, hey man, like, I don't have a bedroom, but if you want to fucking, sleep on the couch or just hop in the tent, like, you can now extend that hospitality, and that becomes the first step of being able to be a community leader, is being able to give someone else resources to continue. And that kind of becomes the whole premise of everything after that. Because I'm going to dive into law speak and Scald, and anyone new to Asatru, like, the entire reason the prose and the poetic were saved is not because of the religious aspect, but the poetic meter that's in them. But that poetic meter in the poetic, I think it's poetic, might be the prose. Okisana, is that? I think that's poetic. I think it's poetic because that's where the Galder comes in. I'd have to grab my saga off the bookshelf. But there is Galder written into Lokisana, where Loki is casting a spell. And, we've dove into this in the class here on Bragg a couple of times of, the anti-homosexual aspect that's included in Asatru, right? That is a spell cast by Loki. And because it's Galder and it's a poetic meter, if you have an oral tradition, every time the Gothar would have been reciting that story, he was recasting that spell. Now that it's in writing and we can pull it apart, you can really all right, is augur really a bad thing? Let's have that conversation. Like, Odin learning magic from women did not make him gay. No one ever argues that.
Right.
But we made it a bad thing because of this line. And it's like, pick apart the magic.
It is kind of also backwards that it's like, okay, it doesn't make Odin gay, but you can't practice that. That mentality is flawed.
And those are the things that I want to pick apart in those chapters. But one of the things that makes Asatru so interesting is we're reading sagas. That's our history. Are you writing a saga about what you're doing at Fort Bliss? We've definitely not written a saga about what we're doing here in Fort Bragg. So that's why
I have a special book.
But
it's nothing crazy. It's not like a
it's
saga.
It's nothing crazy,
saga, but it's a written record
but it should be.
Yeah, it's a written record of when I joined this group, and I have every ritual in it that we have done, and I want to add more to it because we also do community stuff. We're having an all thing this month in 2 weeks because our group has grown exponentially since I've joined. We went from 7 members to over 50 members.
But again, so you're military too, right? So let's look at like the law speak concept, right? Home gang is still a thing. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the Army Combatives, a training circular, it talks about in the back how to run a combatives competition. We can run home gangs. Like we drafted a religious accommodation between 2 pagan members to do a home gang in accordance with the Army training circular for combatives to defend this one guy's honor. Now, granted, one guy slept with another guy's wife and it was a whole other thing. But hey, in the ritual aspect, you could do a home gang in relation to this to defend your honor. And those are the practicals that still exist.
That is practical and awesome because let me just tell you about how that situation in particular is fairly common, unfortunately, in the military. And
let's be honest, it's very common around the world. We just don't talk about it.
Yeah, probably, honestly. But
Yeah,
anyway,
it is.
so it's a common unfortunate thing. And giving ritual space for that to happen in accordance with the military rules and regulations, that's really cool, because a lot of times people just have to deal with it and internalize it and go to their therapist, and then they're angry, and there's not really anything you could do except like learn how to cope and accept it. And yes, that is part of it, but also giving it space to defend your honor and to deal with it in a way that...
That's the same thing with outlaw status.
Yeah.
Like, you know, if you get into the laws in the historical sagas, like doing an all thing and making someone an outlaw came with consequences, and they were time. So being able to say like, hey man, you did this thing, you're going to be given an outlaw status, and this is what it means now. You're not welcome in the group. You don't have access to but being able to put those into a communal understanding is something we're missing. Like, I'll use like Sharia law as an example. It is still religious law, and it exists for a reason, and they still function. And don't get me wrong, some of it, not all of it's good, like some crazy stuff, but that's a whole nother discussion. But like you're saying, like these things are happening, and there is no documented recourse to address them. And there should be, especially in a communal practice where these things are going to happen, and there needs to be an establishment. And I know like you're talking about doing an all thing. I know it's been discussed in a board. There needs to be a North American all thing that brings in the different groups, because until we do something like that, we can all say that we disagree with the AFA, but there needs to be a conclave that is saying, no, this is not acceptable, and your organization is not recognized. Because then you can have basically like Supreme Court decisions that say, no, this isn't okay, this isn't recognized by the community, and leave it to be addressed. Because then we have to self-regulate. The government's going to do some of it. The rest of it has to be done by us.
Yes, because I mean, even if we are different, if you want to call it tribes, if you have TAC, we're more of an educational resource. We're more scholarly, I guess, or we're becoming more scholarly. That's the direction we're headed. Yep. You have, yes, and so we're not like a mass kindred. We are a resource. So we're like the scholarly ones. We have the Troth, who are our buddies. You know, I'm not in the Troth. I can't speak for them, but they're doing a lot of practical. Yes,
I am in the Troth as well. They're doing a lot of practical. They are doing academic, but their academic is different. Their academia is in publication, which I think is a direction that TAC itself will eventually take as we grow back out.
Trying to get them to be guests on the pod.
Oh, they should. I think that bringing those key organizations that represent the greater values of Asatru is going to be critical to the future survival of us. But just like we talked about legal requirements, we have to work together to establish that precedence, which is something we haven't done.
Right.
Through personal issues, it hasn't happened. But I think
it's historical. Okay, wait, let me rephrase this.
We must formalize alliances in the historical context in a modern application in order to successfully succeed where there are major theological organizations that would actively see us shut down.
Yes. I don't know if you've listened to the holiday episodes. Whenever we talk about an all thing, I always go into the history about it. The all thing in Uppsala in Sweden, every single Swedish pagan had to come to this thing. And if you were Christian and didn't want to participate in the all thing, you had to pay a fine or a fee to say, I'm not doing this, but here's some money, you know? And June is when Iceland had their all thing. Every single jarl, every single, everybody. Every free man came. And so you have these different jarls that represented the different, even if they were warring, they had to establish grith, which is different than frith, because say if they're at war and they're enemies, they're still going to this thing because we need to talk as a nation or as Norse people. Whether your main god that you are a tribe of is Odin, whether it's Thor, whether it's Tyr, whoever it may be, you came to this thing to discuss how we're going to move forward. And that's something that I think we can accomplish in this day and age. If we look at it in a modern sense, in a practical sense, that would be us, the Troth, some other people. There are other organizations, I'm sure. It's just us and the Troth are the ones that I know the most.
You have Odin's warrior tribe is probably the other big of the 4. And then there are, I mean, even in this discussion, like, we have to open that dialogue to I want to say the social media influencers. I love Northwood Kindreds and what they're doing. I disagree with some of their stuff, just on a practice basis, but like, Northwood Kindreds needs to be there. They represent an interest in the community and they have a following. We have to open them up because those influencers need to be pulled in. Like, TikTok's a really good example of this. Norse Talk got some interesting individuals and they need to be brought in that conversation.
And that also opens the door. Historically, even if these tribes were warring or disagreed with each other fundamentally, they were still invited to be a part of this discussion. And that brings the question, if there was a true all thing, not just within TAC, not just within a local community, but on a national level, would we invite the AFA?
Yes, we have to.
You have to.
And because, I mean, this gets into the law speak conversation of developing that as a practice. Each community needs to be developing those laws. They need to be canonized in a modern practice. They have to be invited in order to truly be ostracized. There has to be legal recourse to say no. Or even if they're invited and we can't reach the agreement that they should be ostracized, still establishing, like, let's be honest, 1488 is not okay.
It's not.
If you don't know what 1488 is, like, go research it, turn on a VPN, you'll get some interesting results. But there has to be certain things that we can agree on as ideology that is not okay and why it's not okay. And that includes the backing between the Gothar of like, no, this isn't okay.
And I feel allowing them the chance to explain themselves, even though we all definitely disagree.
We walk into it disagreeing with them anyway. Everyone should be afforded the platform to say, this is what I believe and why. And then there has to be that dialogue that then says, no, at this particular moment, according to this all thing, we are at war. And it has to be a public, not like, I love Declaration 127. I completely appreciate the effort, but it's such a, signing a petition only does so much.
Right.
Till we invite them and have those conversations and actually formally declarize, like, no, like, we're at odds with you. The Geneva Convention is a great example. We need to develop that all thing that says, hey, these things are off limits. These things aren't. But, you know, when you look at combating white nationalism, yes, you protest, go for it. But if you're, you know, a military member, been around for GWAT, counter-threat finance is a thing. Like, all right, cool. We're going to start identifying the banks that support them and how they bring in their revenue, and we're going to look to counter the revenue streams. And this gets into the honorable warriors and having a group that understands that. And we have our actual dialogue of like, what in the modern application, what does honorable combat mean? Because It's not chucking Molotov cocktails at protests. Because this is not room for violent extremists.
It's illegal to harm people like that, first of all. Second of all, hurting them physically will only ignite their fires.
And those have to be dialogues.
Yes, it has to be dialogue. It has to be the way you fight them is to stop supporting them, whether it's buying their books from their authors, buying their merchandise if people who are of that
But this
group.
Also gets into the conversation of things like doxing and swatting, and those are not tactics of an honorable warrior.
No.
And they need to be addressed, especially because I would, in an irregular warfare perspective or an asymmetric warfare perspective, there are tactics that we as a community need to agree are off limits because they put people at physical risk.
Mm-hmm.
Like counter protests, like we need to have those dialogues and establish what is warfare in Asatru in a modern application, because we're not grabbing swords and shields and going to war.
Right.
But there is a historical precedent set to actively combat things, and we should be looking to establish what that looks like. And especially when you have the conversation of, we're not going a Viking, like, we're going to be honorable warriors. What does this look like in modern days? We have to give people access to the resources to understand the conversation of, well, I disagree with this, what can I do? Because there's a lot of people that are putting themselves at risk, and they shouldn't be. People are putting people at risk, and they shouldn't be. But that's a whole nother militant conversation that other people can be like, oh my God, what are we talking about?
Once again, we have squirreled.
At least it was somewhat on topic.
Yeah, but honestly, that was an important thing I think we do need to talk about.
People want to be active and they want to counter the things that they disagree with. And there should be a venue to have those conversations, to have the conversation and develop tactics that are legal, that do not put human lives at risk, but still counter the things that need to be countered. I mean, I know there's a growing dissent, but like at the same time, it's like, no, like it's not okay to be a Nazi. It is also illegal to punch Nazis. Yes, I understand that, you know, everyone wants to go punch a Nazi, but you've now committed assault. What are better ways to do this? So,
Right.
And those will be fun conversations. And I'm sure Courtney's gonna be like, Dave, really? This is what you talked about?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to have her pre-listen to this episode. Like, do we need an anyway? Okay, so next question. As TAC's treasurer, what goals do you have for the organization financially or structurally?
So we kind of talked about it a little bit. Structurally, we're moving towards the academic. I think moving towards the academic is going to advance us the most, because we're pulling a lot of historical doctrine, and we have, you know, second generation publicists that are like, well, I did this for 30 years and I wrote a book about it, which is great. But where does that advance the study of like, all right, cool. Like, I want people that are willing to explore what does it mean to be Asatru within First Amendment rights in the United States. I want DRGLs that are writing the academic papers that say, hey, our chaplain corps is not meeting all of our needs for these reasons. Here's how we legally address it. I want to see us advance that. Financially, I know we talked about it a little bit, balancing the budget, developing future fundraisers, and truly becoming an academic base for people to reach back to. Really, you and I talked about it a little bit before we started recording, but I've been on the board since 2018, 2019. What do I do when I leave? Chris Ray, hopefully one day, you know, he'll be active again and be able to have those conversations. But I know I've talked about it with Courtney, like there needs to be those individuals that have been in leadership positions that should now be advisors. You have completed honorable service to the board. It's time to let somebody else take your place, but I don't want to lose you as a resource. We recognize you as an elder to the community because of your service, and you're in an advisor position. You know, like past presidents, once they're out of office, they still continue to serve the country, some of them in less than ideal ways. But like, I think it was Carter went as an ambassador for a situation because he was a former president. It's like, he is an elder of the United States. We want you to go show that we support this idea and we want to have a dialogue about it. That's an outstanding role for people that are leaving board positions to continue to cycle through. So I think structurally, I'd like to see us grow towards some of those advisor positions post leadership, where it's like, hey, thank you for your service. You are now a lifelong member of TAC, kind of like they are with the Troth. You're our advisor. You're our elders, and you're here to advise when the board has an issue. And I think I think we talked about it a little bit in the academic sense of, we've had a lot of people bring up wanting to do prison outreach. And every time we've had this conversation, that's a lot. There's a lot more that goes into it. It's politically sensitive. You need expertise and training. As we transition into that academic sense, you know, I think like in my personal practice, finishing the CTP makes you a GOTHI, but that doesn't make you an expert.
Right.
So I think like once you finish the CTP, your continuing education is like, hey, this is a special project that we want to work on, kind of in your academic sense of like, we'd like you to come back and basically pursue a master's in this and deal with this issue, whether it's domestic violence, it's prison outreach, it's homelessness, it's international relations. I want to see that. I want to see our CTP members finish the program, provide for their community, and then advance TAC.
Yeah. That is ideal. I think in order to get some of those things, we have to work on our continuity. Like, how does a board member change from being a board member to that advisory role? And part of that is training up new leaders. And at this time right now, we are still
post restructure. We're hurting for
volunteers.
We're hurting for volunteers, and we're hurting for expertise. And I think there's a lot of people out there that we will see come back, but we need to incentivize them coming back, because there has to be some incentive and some justification to continue to come back.
Sorry.
I think that's the future. And I think that as we build that continuity, finding ways to retain members for advisory positions. It's like you're no longer actively in leadership, but you're still a leader and advisor to us.
Yeah.
And I would love to, anybody listening that's okay with money and wants to come do these things, I'll gladly take a replacement and step aside and work on the academic side, truly on the academic side, trying to get papers published and get this into existing educational structures that can legitimize the way forward, which is what we're missing. We're about 250 years behind where we should be.
Yeah, honestly, yeah. I mean, it's been coming back. We're getting more people talking. We're getting more volunteers. We're getting things going. We're still rebuilding trust.
I think our volunteer 101, which may end up becoming like cohort 1 of the CTP, is going to help bring people back. For those that aren't members that haven't read the board minutes, one of the things we're looking at is we call it cohort 1. It's part of the CTP program, but it's essentially going to become your 101 level classes. Cohort 2 of the CTP is going to be your 200 level classes and your associates. And then the final parts of the CTP, cohort 3 and 4, are going to be more of your junior and senior year of a bachelor's, where we're really trying to solidify what that education and output looks like so that individuals grow. And then I know in the 500, 600 level conversation, looking at academic is where we start looking at prison outreach, domestic violence, suicide prevention, the harder issues that we need people with the solid knowledge base to tackle problems. And even if those programs are eventually like, cool, we've done a 600 level class, we had someone that's written, a primer on how to address suicide in Asatru. Hey, we're going to roll that down into a 300 or 400 level class, and then we're going to make a 100 introduction because, my first 90 days as a DRGL, those are things we were dealing with. Like, hey, we have people that are deploying to Poland. We have suicide risk. How do you address this? And understanding, how do you help someone write, an Asatru funeral or memorial ceremony? Like, those things eventually have to get rolled to lower levels. But I think the people that have done the CTP before, as we start the continuing education process, I think that's where we'll start seeing them come back and rebuild that trust of like, hey, we're still here. We're still the same inclusive organization that wants to advance Asatru in what we consider the right way.
Right. Another thing about the education courses, we're redoing the ambassador program to help leaders. And that, I think, is going to help ignite some things, right? I have created a committee who is currently vetting the first module of the ambassador training course. And
I think
it's more focused on leadership and more focused on community building than rituals. And I'm actually having David Baus help me write a couple of the modules because it's kind of his expertise, resilience and problem solving. And I haven't had a lot of experience dealing with the negative sides of leadership because things keep falling into place for me, which is great.
I pray it continues that way.
Yes. I mean, not to say I haven't had any problems, just that they have been minor. And I felt more confident having those modules written by somebody who either has that experience or has had the training behind it.
Yeah, and I think as we approach the ambassador program again, and I think as we restructure it, that to be an ambassador really is an associate level understanding of a situation. And I think if you overlay the academic future of TAC, breaking it down in ways that adult learners can process the information is going to be critical. Because personal opinion, there for a while, TAC put a lot of emphasis on the ambassadors and not as much on the Gothars. And just like the church, like a deacon can do a lot of things, but at a certain point, that's the priest's responsibility. And we kind of need to approach it in that same regard. And I think having an associate level program that we're developing where you come out of, 6 months to a year of training and you're like, okay, yeah, you're an ambassador, I think will be really helpful because the ambassadors for the longest time were the foundation of TAC, and we need that back. We need the small community leaders because like here, I know Bliss is similar where you have El Paso, but then you also have Las Cruces and you have White Sands Missile Range, and like you have to have individuals at those locations to be the representative. And I think the ambassadors really do fill that role. But the DRGLs need to be Gothi. They need to be Gothars that can actually like, hey, here's the ritual. Or, for those non-military, like a garrison commander of an installation is generally a full-bird colonel, and they represent the entire base. As a DRGL or a lay leader, that's who you work for. And if they come asking those hard questions of, we're dealing with, a suicide problem within the pagan community, what can we do? Or, for Fort Bragg, we've got troops in Poland, how do we provide them services? what resources do you need? Like, you are advising, as a chaplain at that point, you have normally a captain or a major or an O3 or O4 that is there as your conduit. But, for a junior enlisted E4, E5, I know coming from the infantry, I didn't talk to my company commander for the first 2 years. Like, that was not my role. I didn't leave my squad or my platoon. So then to step into these roles where it's like, hey, I'm in E4 and I would like to help run this program. Cool, man, or whoever. You're expected to have a conversation with a colonel or a general. I don't think we talked about it in podcast 3, but as the director of military affairs, I was calling the commanding general of Fort Lindenwood because they were canceling services for distinctive religious groups and having to have conversations with a 2-star of like, hey, that's illegal. We will sue you. At the time, that's me as an E7. And then with religious accommodations, I was having conversations with the command sergeant major of Special Warfare Center and School on the docket to go talk to the commanding general because he was taking 6 months to approve accommodations. If you're an ambassador and you have at least an associate's level of training, you're going to be more prepared to have those conversations than the original ambassador program, which was a week long and a couple pieces of paperwork.
Yes, because I did that and I was like, that's it? Now I'm an ambassador? I wonder if that leads to the question, should I add an additional resource that is a non-required ambassador thing, but something focused for DRGLs?
I think for the DRGLs, yes, but I would also think when we look at like the Volunteer 101 certification, we probably should look at adding public speaking modules in there. Professional writing, because I think when we talked about it originally, and this is my idea, that doesn't mean the board selected to do it, but that Volunteer 101 is something that you do before you even volunteer to be an ambassador. And then because we're running background checks and we're waiting to teach them, like that doesn't mean we can't open other modules and do public speaking or memo writing to help professionalize our volunteers. Because I think I read you that letter that we're working on when we're reaching out to the installations. Being able to write a professional email is a talent at a certain point.
Right.
And then you've got to follow up with it. So
writing these things down so I can talk about them with the board.
Come back to your group?
No, not to my group, to our group, to the board.
Oh yeah, we do have a board meeting on Monday.
Yeah, I do think that's tomorrow.
No, but yeah, I think there's I know that when I did my associates, even though, so when I graduated the Civil Affairs qualification course, I was eligible for an associate's through the local FTCC as a part of the military program, but there was still a list of classes that I had to accomplish. And even though I had done CAQC and I had 3 months of training that was specifically about going into a meeting and talking to somebody, sitting down and relearning that in an academic setting for public speaking opens your eyes to a bunch of things. And even though some of my presentations, I had to talk to my own team members and record the conversation, you learn a lot when you have to record yourself having a conversation. And I think helping people develop those engagement strategies is going to be critical, because for military members, we have a lot of, junior enlisted privates and specialists that are like, hey, I'm interested in doing this. And then it's like, hey, cool. When was the last time you wrote a professional email to the boss? Yeah. When was the last time you sat through a training meeting? I haven't. I just do my job. Like, all right, cool. Like there's a knowledge gap.
Yes.
So yeah, there's some learning, and I think we'll grow.
Yeah. A Volunteer 101 class with public speaking and professional memo writing, that might be
I would separate the Volunteer 101 from professional speaking and memo
writing. Like have
writing.
those be 3 different courses.
Yeah, like that's your 102, 103.
Yeah.
Because like public speaking can be, even for a college setting, an expedited semester, 7 weeks with assignments. And you and I can have a conversation at the board meeting about it. But like, to me, it's like, hey, your script is you're going to call this person and talk about this issue. And then a part of the graded assignment is they call whoever the professor of that subject is, and like, you're going to have a recorded phone call about this subject.
It's crazy.
And you'll really we talked about it even in this podcast, where like and everything else, where you start those crutch words.
Yes.
Like funny story, before I went CA, I was a ranger instructor, and they do that. They have you pitch a class and they record it, and they tear it apart at the end. For those that don't wear a military uniform, you now have pockets on your chest. I made the mistake of having money in one of my chest pockets, so I played with the coins, and they're like, why were you playing with your nipple for 30 minutes? Like, there's a quarter in there. You really start to learn those things. That's like, no, I did that. my crutch word is up, or like, hey, you gave a 30-minute lecture and you dropped 14 F-bombs. Like, we need to work on that. So I think professionalizing the ambassador program and having, those 3 classes, because even if we're waiting on their background check and approval, those are classes that anyone could do.
Yeah.
And just open them up, especially with our classrooms. I think that would be a good role for our recent CTP grads of like, hey, like, I want you to get some practice being an instructor, and here's the classes that you're going to run. I know that, for those that haven't in some way had to establish classes, like having classes that are not online training where you click through slides, but having to facilitate, it gets very labor and time intensive. So yeah, they're things to explore.
Yeah, I wrote these down so I could add them to, I have ACOM and EdCom. So ACOM is our academic instructors, and then EdCom is the people who get the first access to the classes, and they tell me, does this flow?
Yes or no?
Is this enough information? Is there too much information? Should this be split up in 2 different modules? Or this doesn't have a place in this course, can we move it to a different course type thing? So, and then
They're
ACOM,
gonna be busy.
Yeah. And right now they just have the first module of the ambassador course, but the entirety of the first cohort of the CTP is very basic knowledge. So we're changing that to be like Asatru fundamentals or whatever we're going to call it. That's their next project. So we're working on the first half of the ambassador training course, and then they're going to Asatru fundamentals. But then having these 3 would be awesome. So our ACOM, the instructors, are also very busy right now. So we might not even get to Volunteer 101, public speaking, or professional memo writing. We'll get to that for a while, but
we're definitely rebuilding the longhouse.
Yes, it's some work. So if you have experience in any of these things and want to volunteer, please reach out to me. You can find me at podcast@theasatrucommunity.com, or I am on Facebook. You'll find me, Susanna Wandering Star, and I post a lot. So just reach out.
Always looking for volunteers.
Yes. All right. Where would you like to see the Asatru community in 3 to 5 years? What changes or growth do you hope to help guide?
3 to 5 years from now. 5 years from now, I would definitely like to have a replacement. But I think 5 years from now, we should be seeing the things that we're talking about right now done, where we have a standing curriculum that you can walk into Asatru, pick it up, learn how to practice. But then also for those that have been around a while, can step into that next role. Asatru is not, I think we've talked about it before, where it's like, for me, it's individual, it's family, it's community. At a certain point, you've got to step beyond your community to truly understand the situations that occur in the sagas. The saga of the Icelander is a great example of the blood feud of, can you really understand the blood feud, like, without actually dealing with, communal disputes? And how to translate the situations. To me, to truly be a practitioner of Asatru, at some point you have to be a leader. It changes the dynamic when you leave your family. Because it's one thing for me to teach my daughter, a linear practice with like, hey, figure out how to grow grapes. Tell me what you need. Tell me the soil composition. It's another to go from that to like, hey, we're gonna grow for the family. And then looking at it from a community perspective, for me in particular, like my linear practice is not limited to like, oh, I just grew this. It's like, no, we have 4 major bloats in a year. Did I grow enough to be able to provide to the community from my personal practice meals for those events? Even mead making, backwards planning, being able to make mead 6 months in advance for a ritual. It's a process. So, in 3 to 5 years, I would like to see those cycles exist within the community that are self-sufficient and truly represent a higher learning, not just, oh, I picked up the saga and I read it.
Yeah, I think that's a great goal. And I think it's achievable too.
100%. In 3 to 5 years? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say 10 years from now, we have a physical hall.
Mm-hmm.
A physical hall that is separate from the board, like we talked about with, an actual leasing understanding. It's its own 501. We're fundraising to host events. I think Texas holds a couple of good Viking Ren fairs, but not just a Viking Ren fair, but an actual living hall that represents modern Asatru.
That's why I would like to sublet.
When you get that 100
property.
acres.
Yes, when I get that 100 acres, that's why I want to sublet it, because I don't think I should own it. But if I live near the property, I can maintain.
You become the God person.
Yes.
And I think in that historical context, getting beyond president, secretary, treasurer, like having things that are running Hofs where it's like, no, like you are the god person of this community. Yes, you're subletting that property as the Earl or Jarl, but that Hof is the responsibility of the god person in that true historical sense of like, no, this is my property. I maintain it and I'm responsible for it.
Right.
And I think those will make good, 10 years from now, those will make good academic outreach centers where it's like, hey, no, like we have a physical library now too. Come to the library.
Yeah.
Come to the Hof,
Well, and it also, because the goal is 100 acres and sublet the property for the Hof, that doesn't mean I'm giving the Hof 1 acre just for the building. Like, I want it to have a community center, an outdoor worship center, like for rituals. It would be cool to host all
Let's get
things
some
there.
goat yoga going.
Yeah, we'll have goats. We'll have garden.
I think we talked about it in the last one. Is like I have the acreage up in Kentucky that I want to clear it off and turn it into an orchard, and I'm gonna name it Eden's Orchard. And like, I want to have a longhouse there where it's like, cool, like we're gonna do a community event, and yeah, like no, like come hang out. We're gonna spend the weekend. Like you can literally pick apples off the orchard, like skills classes where it's like, how do you take live fruit, turn it into mead? How do you preserve it? Like all of those things. And I think that's, as we look at, ourselves as like 4th generation Asatru in the United States, 10 years from now, that's entirely possible. And that gets into the academic stuff of, I'm going to University of Charleston in West Virginia, like post-Army. That's where I want to be, is out in the mountains away from the military installations and having those conversations. And I think looking at it holistically, we need a Hof that's out at the beach that represents Ran and that whole scenario. You need one in the mountain that's representing, the other aspect of the hunter. And then we need the farmland that is focused on like what is a veneer practice. And then, St. Louis being halfway, like that's a perfect place for like an Asatru longhouse where the focus is academic and leadership. But building those, and I think probably the better vernacular is, 10 years from now, we should have Asatru centers of excellence that are community focused, that are 501s. Like I appreciate Northwood Kindred, but that's still their kindred. You're not going to the kindred land. We need those public places.
A closed, like they have said they will have
public facing.
Yes. That's why I believe in subletting and not owning the Hof or tax purposes or for legal aspects.
I mean, for legal aspects and tax purposes, if we're doing it right and purchasing land on behalf of TAC and advancing that, that does become a tax write-off where we have those responsibilities to maintain it. And, where I appreciate the historical church, the priests lived on the land. Like we should be looking for individuals. It's like, hey, like TAC owns this land. I want you to live there and take care of it. We're looking for a volunteer to fill it. Even if it's like a board member that's like, hey, I live in West Virginia. This place is down. I would like to fundraise to purchase this land to be, TAC Hof West Virginia, TAC Hof Kentucky. And it's a part of the board structure of like, hey, from the treasurer, we have these properties. These are the taxes that are due. Here's our write-offs. Here's how we're running it. Here's who's responsible. Because I'd love to have one out here in North Carolina. That's where I'm from. But, going out towards Sanford or Southern Pines in North Carolina, right outside of Fort Bragg, being able to find 5 to 6 acres and build a Hof that is like, hey, if you're a military member practicing Asatru, like come up. And then, obviously post-Army, but I'm a huge supporter of RVs and like, let's run some shore power where it's like, hey, you want to come spend a week at the Hof, like plug in, here's your fees. And it's not like an RV park where we're not opening it to everyone, but if you want to park and, like, hey, it's planting season, we just had a blast
experience.
Frost. Yeah, like we're going to go through this practice. Obviously military stuff, like I'm sure we could get Hofs and like sublet, like, hey, we have RVs and you want to get out of the barracks, like here's the requirement.
Yeah, spend your 4-day here. We're going to have a community garden sesh and have a community ritual, do some community cooking even. Yeah, that would be so awesome. That is the goal. That is the goal with my 100 acres. The Hof won't have permission to use all 100 acres because some of it's going to be gardening for my brewery, the farmland and the goats and all that. But
yeah, I look forward to not having to worry about the deployment and being like, all right, cool, what are we doing this year? Like, all right, the goal is to get 30 apple trees in. Truly have free range chicken where it's like, all right, cool. Or even raising a cow for, having a couple acres to rotate through. Like, we're going to raise, a cow a year, and then come winter's night, like that one is sacrificed, and that is the food for the community through this entire process.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
something we were talking about in my local group is that we're going to bring to the all thing is helping each other. Like, okay, so you want to clean up your backyard. And I was like, okay, I'll bring a 6-pack for me, and then I'll help you do this. So, and my parents, they said the same thing. That's kind of where I got the idea from, is they said, when you buy your land, if you need help laying the foundation and putting up the walls real quick, we're going to come up. Very Amish style. They're like, we'll pull up, we'll all bring our camping gear, and we'll just help you raise this foundation so you can build your house.
From a religious perspective, if you look at how Asatru should work, it's like the Amish, but with electricity.
Yeah.
Like, we should be self-sufficient.
If you need help planting your 30 apple trees, just hit me up.
Yeah.
Yeah, me and my husband will pull up. It's an 8-hour drive. I drive more than that when I go home on 4-day weekends. Is there a rune, deity, or piece of lore that's guiding you right now in your journey?
So, I think we kind of touched on this. Post-army, I would like to be a warrior in a garden. So I think the first part of my life was guided by Tyr, very much a warrior mentality, and looking at justice, which then, for anybody who actually dives into the lore, that is a very, what's the word I'm looking for? That is not a clear cut once you dive into the story of Tyr. But I find myself transitioning more to Freyr and being in the garden and the lifestyle of the Vanir practice. So what's guiding me right now very much has to do with Othala and transitioning to the family and that heritage in a not white supremacist manner.
Yeah.
I definitely have some very white babies, but that is not what it's about. That's kind of what's guiding me right now. Personally, I have one male in my family that is older than 50. My dad, my granddad, great-grandfather, all dead, massive heart attacks at 50 or before. So as I reach my 40s, I feel like my countdown timer's getting to that 10-year mark of like, hey, how do I prepare them for post me? And that's what's guiding me right now, is truly raising the next generation. And I think, even staying with Tyr as my main patron, part of what I'm looking to do after the Army, being a college professor, is to be involved in the ROTC program and raising the next generation of officers, just because this has been my life. Do I want to be a contractor? No, but I would like to pass on the knowledge to that next generation that's going to carry the flag forward, always hopefully for the better. So that's kind of what's guiding me right now.
That's incredible.
I'm getting old. That's what it is. Old and sentimental.
You're not getting old and bitter. I'm sure there's a little bit, but
there's definitely a little bit.
But you're getting older in a way that you want to prepare.
Death is not meant to be avoided. It's meant to be greeted as an old friend, and that is definitely where I would like to be.
Any words of encouragement for heathens who are new to this path or new to TAC?
So for new heathens, word of encouragement is you're not wrong. What you're feeling is valid, and there's a history to the religion. We may be rebuilding, but everyone has a part. This isn't a religion like the Catholic Church full of dogma. You have a say. We've talked about with the all things. This is your chance to grow and move forward and make the religion what it should be for the future. As we bring up the old roots of things, like this is truly a religion where, I think we talked about it in podcast 3, like, I can't tell you how to heathen, but I can tell you you're doing it wrong. You're not doing it wrong. It really is picking your path and walking it. I may not agree with your path, but that doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. I may have opinions, but it's on you to explore. When you truly take the filter off and you read the stories and you look at how it applies today, yes, mankind has advanced in the last 3,000 plus years, or since the 700s with the raid on Linden Farm, but there's still applications, and mankind is still the base person. Our purpose is to raise the next generation. From an Asatru perspective, it's to be the honorable warrior, so that if you're picked by Odin, you're fighting for the future and to be the best representation of the gods. So I think we talked about it before. It's like, if you're a new practitioner, really it's just picking up the Raven banner and carrying it forward with honor to honor your ancestors, or to right the wrongs of your ancestors in the past for some people, because that's a thing. But just to be a better person. It's a wonderful experience. It can be a very scary experience, both in the real world and the spiritual. If you're getting into the religious practice and actually doing the magic work, just know that once you crack that Kim light, it doesn't go out. Have fun. There are some scary things in the dark. But
for sure.
Yeah, to quote Dewey Cox, it's a beautiful ride.
Yeah.
And then if anybody actually gets the Dewey Cox reference, have fun with that.
Well, that's all of our questions.
It's good. It was fun. Thanks for having me again.
Of course. It's always great.
I look forward to continuing to hear all these things. And then I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow for the board meeting.
Yeah, I should probably work on those notes for that. Thank you so much for joining us today on Fireside Frith, and thank you, David, for being a guest today. If you have any questions, stories, or reflections you'd like to share, we'd love to hear from you at podcast@theasatrocommunity.com. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and check out our socials at Fireside Frith Pod and theasatrocommunity.com. Until next time, may your hearth be warm and your path be guided by Frith and wisdom.
Yeah, enjoy it. Bye.
Bye.